Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, depending on where you are. Welcome to the Troika Threat, how illegal immigration, asylum abuse, and transnational drug running endanger our national security. I'm Adele Nazarian, a senior fellow at the Gold Institute for International Strategy, and it's my privilege to moderate today's discussion. This event couldn't be more timely. Across the Western Hemisphere, we're witnessing a convergence of crises, the erosion of border integrity, security, the exploitation of asylum seekers and systems, and the rise of transnational criminal and ideological networks that threaten not only our national security, but our social cohesion. The term troika, you may have heard it, evokes three forces working in tandem. And that is precisely what we face today: illegal immigration, narcotics trafficking, and ideological subversion operating in concert, feeding instability and undermining trust in democratic governance. This is not a partisan issue, it is a human, moral, and strategic one. Our goal today is to go beyond sound bites and examine how these networks intersect, how cartels and extremist groups exploit humanitarian channels, how foreign influence erodes Western institutions, and how media narratives can distort public perception, making truth itself a casualty of politics. We are joined today by four distinguished voices, each bringing a unique perspective from law enforcement, journalism, advocacy, and strategic policy. Ruchi Wali is General Secretary of the Canadian National Council of Hindus. She joins us from Ontario, representing the grassroots front lines of community advocacy and resilience. Mark Black is a retired NYPD detective investigator and senior fellow, along with me, at the Gold Institute for International Strategy. He brings decades of experience in counterterrorism, cybercrime, and infrastructure protection. Daniel Boardman is a senior contributor to the National Telegraph and the executive director of the Global Cyrus Institute. He adds a critical lens on information warfare and ideological influence. And Utsav Chakrabarti, another colleague of mine, is the executive director of Hindu Action, Hindu Act in Washington, D.C., an NGO that offers, and he's offering deep insight into Beltway politics and the policy framework shaping the Western response to extremism. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes of opening remarks before we move into a series of thematic discussions from border vulnerabilities and transnational crime to diaspora networks, disinformation, and policy solutions. So this conversation will not just be about identifying the threats, it's about reclaiming strategic clarity, and moral courage in the face of complexity. With that, let's begin with Ruchi. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Adele. Thank you for moderating. And thank you, Utsav, Daniel, and Mark, for your company and perspective. I want to start by wishing today is Guru Nanak Ji's birthday, who was the first Sikh Guru. So, greetings to everyone who's watching. I also want to start by thanking the Gold Institute of International Strategy for providing this critical platform on this, timely issue. It does have a nuisance value attached to it, but at the same time, it's of profound significance because illegal immigration, asylum abuse, and the transnational criminal networks, they pose a great threat to North America's stability, security, economy, and even the social cohesion. But the issue that we are going to talk about is not immigration. The issue is the exploitation of the immigration process due to the loopholes that we have in our system. And in my opinion, the two most exploited routes, at least in Canada, they are the asylum claims as well as the student visa. I just want to quote some numbers, and for asylum, I'll be quoting some numbers that where your application is approved, because you can apply in a different year but your application gets approved in a different year. So in 2022, Canada approved approximately 28,000 asylums. In 2023, we approved close to 37,000 asylums. 2024, this number rose to 46,000. And in 2025, between January and August, we are clocking around 24,000 asylums that have been approved so far till August of this year. Now let's look at the student visa. And when we talk about student visa, always keep the fact at the back of your mind that for student visa you do not need a police verification, at least not in Canada. So in 2022 we approved close to 420k 420K student visas. In 2023, we approved close to, and these are new student visas. Now, I'm not talking about the restamping. In 2023, we approved close to 515K, 515K student visas. In 2024, we approved close to 292K student visas. For 2023, we do not have a official figure from IRCC yet, but I think what they are saying is that they are targeting to drop it by 30%. And I'm sure everybody must have seen the news. I think it was yesterday or day before that 74% of student visas that were filed from India have been rejected. So these are huge numbers. Even if a small percentage of these people who come to Canada, they have a wrong intention, or they are nefarious elements, we are in a big problem as it is. So what begins with an asylum manipulation, it morphs into an ecosystem of transnational drug trade, political and religious extremism, human trafficking, organized crime, which harms our social harmony, our security, and also the international credibility for Canada and Canadians. So that's my opening statement.
Thank you so, thank you so much. I'd like to go to Mark Black next.
Welcome, everybody. And Adele, thank you for moderating today, and welcome to the Gold Institute. Today, I'm going to actually speak upon the pressures of what is happening within the law enforcement community, and particularly policing and local policing. They're with any crime groups, international, domestic crime, everything will start off at the local level. And what is happening now within the United States is, even though that the Trump administration and the administration in general is very pro-police, that doesn't necessarily mean that at the local level you're going to see an increase in recruitment and retainment, which is extremely, extremely important. And that's because local law enforcement and a lot of these crimes that we're going to be talking about today will also partner up with the federal law enforcement agencies, which we call the alphabets, which are like the FBI, ATF, Secret Service. If in areas such as what we're seeing in New York City, where the law enforcement numbers at NYPD are at dangerous levels and possibly even going down after this mayoral election, what is going to happen at the local level? And the federal law enforcement agencies are very dependent on local law enforcement agencies, which we'll get later on in the discussion today, in dealing with these sort of crimes, sophisticated crimes, and also dealing with the organized crime elements. So we're going to discuss today the pressures that we see with local law enforcement and recruitment and retention numbers. And I'll also be speaking about how these organized crime gangs and organized criminal entities, as sophisticated as they are, it really is nothing new. And I'll speak upon it going back into the 1800s all the way up to what's happening today. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion, and thank you for having me today.
Adele, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'd like to now go to Daniel Boardman.
Well, thanks for having me. So, drugs, crime, ideological subversion, the alternative title is The Story of Canada, in my view. So I'm going to start by telling a based on a true story, Canadian story, which, like all modern Canadian stories, starts in Punjab. So I'm going to invent a Canadian refugee called Jagmeet Singh Jr. Now, Jagmeet Singh Jr. lives in Punjab and he wants to go to Canada. So he wants to get an education like all good Indian boys want to do. And he's looking at different places to go. And he doesn't know a ton about Canada, so he wants to get a student visa. And he meets with an immigration officer who tells him, oh, if you want to get immigration to Canada, just go to these schools. It's very easy. Are these schools McGill, Western, Queen's, U of T, UBC, real schools? No. In Canada, we have tons of diploma mills. So Northwest Technical Institute of Friendship and Understanding, right? Anything with there's Northwest Technical, this or that. These are schools inside a strip mall where you do 1 hour of online class maybe once a week. But instead of paying, $20,000 a year, maybe $50,000 a year, right? You can get into these much cheaper. You think, oh, great. it's guaranteed that I can get into Canada if I pay the money. So I bribe the Canadian, I bribe the Indian, I bribe the immigration guy, I get into Northwest Technical Institute of Peace and Friendship. Then you go and you land in Brampton and you go to the mall and you go to your school. Now you have some problems here. One, this isn't a real school and you're not learning real skills. Two, you might think, oh, I'm in Canada, I can earn some Canadian wages. The problem is you also have to pay for things in Canadian dollars. And we have a housing crisis because we are a very left-wing country, so we don't believe in building things. We believe in government housing plans that don't build anything. So you end up living in a basement with, at best, 10 other people. It's about, at best, you can get a room where you have access to like 12 hours a day to a certain mat for like $500 a month is the best. But usually you're paying about $1,000, $1,200 a month to sleep on the couch with someone else in a basement full of 12 or 13 different people, right? This is propping up the real estate market and making housing uncompetitive for everyone else. So you are stuck in this basement, you're going to school, you're paying out your nose in rent. You are now in a basic indentured servitude quasi-slavery situation. You want to get a job. So you need to get something called an LMIA, Labor Market Impact Assessment. This is the Canadian equivalent of an HB1 visa that isn't quite a good comparison. So these are special visas, and you see like, oh, $35 an hour in Canada to work at A&W or Tim Hortons. And a labor market LMIA is a job that the company has to prove that no Canadian is capable or willing to do. So why, and the minimum is $35 an hour. So why can you make $35 an hour working at A&W? The answer is you cannot, right? But if you post a job at $35 an hour, you qualify for an LMIA. Now you've already taken out, let's say, a $50,000 loan from your family just to get to Canada. Now, in order to get the LMIA, it's a corrupt system. So you then bribe and you have to pay for the LMIA. So then you pay for the LMIA, which means the person who's giving you the LMIA gets some money. You also then have to bribe your employer. So you're paying the people like the fast food thing, Tim Hortons, to employ you. And then you're not working for $35 an hour. People work here for maybe I've heard as low as $3 an hour to maybe $10 an hour. You're not getting $15 an hour. So you're now a slave. You're going to school, you're making $3 to $5 an hour, you're working at Tim Hortons. This is why Canada is starting to turn against Indian immigrants, because it's not like, they're stealing the jobs, but in this corrupt system where you can literally force people to pay you $10,000 to get a job and then pay them $3 to $5 an hour because you're stuck in basic indentured servitude. And usually it's people in your own community who you're renting from, who you're getting these LMAs from. It's all done in Punjabi or Marathi or whatever language you speak. So now you're screwed over. Now you're in a basement. You're living with 10 other dudes. You are making $3 to $5 an hour. How do you get out of this slavery thing? How do you make money? Answer is crime. So you're going to the Gurdwaras to get some free food because this is where you go. And these are all now taken over by the Khalistanis. Do you want to make some real money? You want to get some gold on your wrist? You want to get a girlfriend? Well, you can't get a girlfriend if you're living in a basement of 10 people. So you take Jagmeet Singh Jr. and you take a job trucking, which again is a joke to get a qualification in Canada, and now you're transporting goods, which is either fentanyl, cocaine, or some other narcotic, to actually get some money. Now your student visa has expired. How do you stay in the country? Well, you grab a Khalistan flag, you go outside an Indian consulate, you wave it around, you saber rattle the sword, say, kill India, kill Modi, kill Jay Shankar, blah, 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 blah. Now you are a refugee. And this is the story of Canada, and it's just a story as Canadian as Wayne Gretzky in the modern age. And so I feel like this is a bit of a useful fable for people to understand kind of what's going on. So that will be my opening statement. A nice modern Canadian fairy tale.
Thank you so much. And Daniel, you're actually in India right now, correct?
Yes, it's a reverse mass migration. I'm getting back at the Indians doing that. I'm stealing their jobs.
Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for that. Now we're going to go to Utsav Chakrabarti.
You are breaking up, Utsavji.
It's a little bit spotty. We can't really hear you. Maybe disconnect from the Wi-Fi might be better. Still can't hear you. Still can't hear you. I have an idea. Do you want to try to reconnect the Wi-Fi or connect to your phones? Oh, I can't hear you.
Adele, why do we have two Ruchis here on the Zoom?
I'm not sure.
Okay.
You may have shared the link with someone else, I think.
No.
No. Interesting. 1 second.
Oh, it's gone.
There we
No,
go.
Utsav, we cannot hear you, Utsavji.
Okay, let's try. Why don't you try rejoining again? I think that'll be better. What we'll do is, we'll get to. I want to jump into the questions. Let's see if he can come back again and give about 10 seconds. If not, we're going to jump right into the discussion, and then we'll be able to address his opening remarks during one of his questions as well. Okay, great. Utsav, you there? Okay. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to jump into the questions. I'm going to go first to Mark. Thank you so much, everyone, for your great introductions. From your experience, Mark, in law enforcement, how has the operational nature of transnational crime networks evolved in the last decade? Particularly with respect to fentanyl trafficking and human smuggling, and what gaps do you see that they are exploiting in North America across the border and in asylum systems?
Well, actually, this is nothing new. This is just reinventing the wheel. Um, we can go back in history, and I can do it really, really quick. If you go back to the 1840s and 1850s, and if we look at gangs back then, such as the Black Rabbits and the Bowery Boys in Manhattan, they were exploiting the new immigration populations. If you then go up to the turn of the century, about the 1940s, 1950s, you had organized crime with the Italian families coming into being as well. And you had those sort of crime networks, such as Murder Inc. running out of New York and the Purple Gang running out of Chicago. And then if you look at exploiting also the immigrant populations that, as Daniel had mentioned before, and then if you take off post-World War II, we look at the motorcycle clubs, which then turned into the motorcycle gangs that we know of today, particularly in the 1960s. And then if you go into the 1980s and 1990s with the fall of the Soviet Union, essentially the CIS countries, we have those CIS organized crime gangs and Russian crime gangs entering into the United States. And now what we have now is the Southeast Asian gangs, basically coming from, you see it with India, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, and also some of the Arab states. So it's really nothing new. It all happens. Daniel laid it out very, very nicely. These groups or people coming over will prey on their own individuals. Now, what has changed? What has changed now with respect to how the bad guys are looking to exploit the United States or borders, and what is law enforcement doing? Well, first, you have to look at criminals. Criminals are like water. They want the path of least resistance. That's the bottom line. So whatever they're going to do, they're going to exploit it, whether it's through a technology, whether it's through a legal loophole, whether it's using laws on the books against the actual legitimate government or population. So we see that being done over and over again. The question, though, really comes down to, and I want to emphasize this, as I said in my opening remarks, is with respect to what's happening in places like Chicago, Boston, New York City, San Francisco, Asheville, North Carolina, with the numbers of retention numbers declining and recruitment declining, if you lose your police force, then you lost the community. Thereby, what happens is this makes it easier for the criminal element to expand. It's simple, it's not rocket science. And one thing about law enforcement, which people really don't understand, is that all law enforcement is local. It's like politics, all politics is local. It really doesn't really make that much of a difference what's happening on the federal end. because on the local end, that police force is going to follow the directives of the mayor's office or the county executive's office. That's extremely important. The other thing to understand is that law enforcement as a vocation relies heavily on mentorship, meaning that when someone comes on and is brand new, they're going to have mentors that are on patrol. But later on in their careers, as they move out of patrol and go into organized crime investigations or counterterrorism investigations, they're going to have mentors in those specific units. Right now, with the decimation of police forces in larger cities, is a perfect time to be in organized crime. Because what happens is when you lose the mentorship and the brain drain leaves, that's a large void of vocational knowledge that leaves the police force in that local community. And that is extremely important. The other important thing to keep in mind, which is very, very important, is we hear of, as I said, law enforcement, but that's really FBI, ATF, because they really do one thing, and that's investigations, which has an element of intelligence to it. At the local policing level, they police in police departments. There's an investigative wing. There might be a community relations wing. There might be a patrol wing. It's very, very different. So they also know the community. They know the illegal activities that are going on. They're very intimate with the local criminal gangs that are there, local law enforcement, and that's why they need to rely on the federal. That's why the federal law enforcement agencies really need to rely on the local law enforcement to assist them in their investigations. These organized crime gangs are very well aware of this. Extremely well aware of this. And if the government or the voter doesn't change their mindset to support local law enforcement, then what you're going to see is the explosion in the crime rates. And with that being said, is you're going to see more smuggling, human smuggling, which when I was doing computer crimes, I did a lot of child rape, smuggling of people, child pornography cases. A lot of these transnational gangs are into that. That's how they make their money. All right. The other thing is you make it easier. Daniel brought up a great point. I can't emphasize this enough. Where somebody now is getting, let's say, is going into trucking, and here we had the problems with the CDL license and all these licenses that you need for compliancy issues and permitting issues. Well, let me bring this to your attention. Let's say you get a license, a hazmat license, and you're a terrorist organization or whatever you want to say, criminal organization, you want to bomb a rival gang. You get that hazmat license now. Well, guess what you just did? You might have hooked up a truck that has energetic materials, meaning gasoline, oil, whatever it is, even moving explosives legally on the road. Daniel hit upon a very important point. These gangs know how to get these permits, know how to use our legal system, our permitting system, our compliance system against us. All right. One of the things I want to bring up, which is very important, that happened back in the 1990s, we heard of NAFTA. Everybody here heard of NAFTA.
Of course.
Well, this opened up, you talk about illegal drugs and fentanyl and everything today. Look back what happened during NAFTA and look how the logistics were done of the criminal gangs, the narco gangs, moving shipments because it made our border easier to transport because of the maquiladora factories that were on the Tex-Mex borders back then, where for light manufacturing, and they were stealing trucks left and right. Why? Because they didn't care so much about the cargo. They cared a lot about the clean, bills of lading and manifest for the reverse route back into the United States. So they can put their illicit drugs onto and into the logistics system. We see that now. We heard about what's happening in California at train depots, cargo train depots, where the gangs are starting to raid the actual trains themselves, the cargo trains. So going forward, it's nothing new with these gangs. It's just that maybe a new ethnic criminal group that's now wants to be the new boys on the block, so to speak. And now they are here. And a lot of police organizations, one other thing that's very, very important, I'll leave it at this, is that in New York City, if you're doing an investigation and you need someone to speak a certain language, you can get that. I had investigations where I needed a number of different languages: Russian, Albanian, Arabic. I mean, you name it, we can get it. But here's what's happening, what's going on. As our population shift moves out of the Northeast and starts to go south or into the Midwest or Plain States, out of Chicago and areas like that down, you have areas now, police departments, because now the populations are growing, let's say in Mississippi, Arkansas, Huntsville, Alabama, Boise, Idaho. They are going to start to see crimes in those communities they've never seen before. And certain ethnic groups are going to start to go into those areas. And now they're going to be behind the 8 ball because they don't know how these specific criminal groups operate. One of the most neglected policing and law enforcement communities in the United States that are not funded enough are the rural police departments. Because
Absolutely.
today, they are rural. 5, 10, 15 years from now, they might be metropolitan. And criminals, like I said, are like water. They follow the path of least resistance. So a lot of these prosecutors and law enforcement aren't up to speed. And I can't tell you how many times I would get calls from other people from other police departments. Hey, Mark, did you ever deal with this particular group out of Russia? Or did you ever have to deal with this particular group out of Eastern Europe or South America? They've never seen that. And that is what can happen in a very short time period if we don't start supporting our local law enforcement in areas like New York City, Chicago, Boston, not just in the areas that support law enforcement, but the others, because you have to check them. You have to check the bad guys at the border of
And
these
Mark,
laws.
totally. Thank you so much for that really, really comprehensive and insightful view, especially drawing from your own amazing experience in the NYPD police forces. I think that's why everyone has to have pay renewed attention to also these leaders and lawmakers who are, running for office or are in office who want to defund the police, right? That in and of itself is a movement that unfortunately hurts the people who are being protected first and foremost, right? And so thank you so much for that. I want to now, Utsav, you're back. I want to give you a moment to also give your introductory remarks before we go into the rest of the panel. Please, the floor is yours.
I hope you guys can hear me now.
Perfectly.
Okay, perfect. Something internet decided to do when I was trying to speak before. So my main conversation here, and I'm in such good company with people like Mark and Daniel and Ruchi, who have been giving so much detail about what's happening in Canada and what's happening from the law enforcement perspective in America. I wanted to bring notice and light to the point that many of these transnational criminal enterprises that are subverting our legal system and our law enforcement on the basis of illegal immigration and asylum are also foreign influence operations. Many of them are directly connected to China. Many of them are connected to Islamist groups, pan-Islamist groups, or they are, in the case of Khalistan, the proxies of Pakistani intelligence. And we are increasingly seeing that because many of these foreign influencers want these groups to generate money within America or Canada using local resources, they are encouraging them to commit crimes and transport, illegal drugs, weapons, and so on and so forth. I hope we will be discussing more of that later. In fact, between US and Canada, there has been more than $500 million worth of assets that have been recovered just in 2025 from just one of these groups, which is the Khalistan cult movement, primarily supported by the Islamists from Pakistan. And that's just one. And if you look into everything else that's going on, I think it will run into the billions. And that is something that we all need to discuss, and that would be my focus of conversation. Adele, you're muted.
Wonderful. Hey, thank you. So, okay, great. So we're going to jump into another question. Okay, I'm going to address this question now to Daniel and Ruchi. So, Canada, where we are both hail from, is often perceived as a softer target due to its immigration policies. I want to talk about how Canada's asylum framework interfaces with the US system and whether or not you see evidence of coordination among traffickers, ideological operatives, or hostile state actors taking advantage of this north-south asymmetry. And that also honestly ties into, it's a two-pronged question, an issue that, has also seen renewed attention in the media, the Khalistan issue. It's gained renewed visibility in Canada and beyond. Would love to also have you, either of you or both of you, elaborate on how diaspora networks, specifically with, the Khalistanis and whatnot, are funded, as Utsav had alluded to, mentioned, influenced by foreign entities, and these contribute also to radicalization under the cover of civil activism or human rights campaigns.
Yeah, Ruchi, do you want to go first or second on this one?
You can go first. I'll talk about the latter half of the question.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, how does Canada? I mean, the answer to this is Canada is a softer target, and it's a confluence of factors. So, yes, it's softer immigration laws, but Canada, if you're of Indian origin or Jewish, Canada is like Israel and India, where it's a judocracy. Okay, judges are like kings or queens. And especially in Canada, a judge can just make up anything and they're the queen of the universe or the king of the universe. And the laws are so convoluted. And actually in Canada, there's like rulings that you can prioritize people's race if the race is like a oppressed. So you can uplift the oppressed. The answer is wokeness, okay? Every place there is, it's wokeness. It's wokeness in the immigration offices. It's wokeness in the judicial system. It's wokeness in the police force. It's wokeness mostly in the police council. So at every single level, it's a softer target. And because you can sort of come with a sob story to an immigration judge, that gets you in. And I mean, the craziest example of Canadian immigration comes from Quebec, which wants just French-speaking people. And in the 90s, they wanted to because the losers of the Algerian Civil War, which were Islamists, basically proto-ISIS, they had lost the Civil War. And because they lost the Civil War, they were able to claim asylum in Quebec, saying, listen, we're radical Islamic terrorists. We want to institute global Sharia law through violent means. And because of that, we were driven out of Algeria. But because they were able to say it in French, je suis de la radical Islam, je suis le blow up l'airplane, then they're like, oh, come in because you speak French. And immense radicalization. I've heard cases of, again, when the Muslim Brotherhood government fell into Egypt, in Sisi's government, we took in tons of Muslim Brotherhood members because, oh my God, they're so oppressed because they lost it. So every radical group has learned to game the immigration system through a sob story. So you see, the first one is the Muslim Brotherhood getting involved with the left. This is your classic red-green alliance, right? That brought down brought down the country of Iran and turned into the Islamic Republic of Iran when the socialists taught Khomeini how to promise, stop saying we need to, have sex with camels and stop women from dancing, start saying we're giving everything for free. And then they taught him how to speak to useful idiots. And he's like, oh, we're going to give everyone the GDP, crazy stuff like that, but everything free. And then boom, right? Radical Islam, kill all the socialists. You get that, right? We have this going around. And if the Islamists get control, they kill the communists. If the communists get control, they kill the Islamists. This is that. But this is the first group to work together. And the Muslim Brotherhood then started to work with all its ideological allies. So Khalistan, which, as we've identified, was originally a proxy of the ISI. Now, because of Canadian laws, they're a bit more independent because they can fund themselves through narcotics trafficking. And there's an interesting distinction of who is still connected to Pakistan in that. There's a funny story of a minor Khalistani civil war that I kind of helped instigate. But all the ideological bedfellows of the Muslim Brotherhood have learned how to get into leftist rhetoric. So the Khalistanis use oppression Olympics thing is, oh, India is a Hindu nationalist country, and because there's more Hindus and more Sikhs, Hindus oppress Sikhs because there's more of them than us. And Sikhophobia, Sikh discrimination, 1984 genocide, all these different talking points. They learn to adapt that, get into the lexicon of the oppressor-oppressed radical leftist system, get into that sort of interfaith dialogue. So they have backing of the institutional left, they have backing of the Muslim Brotherhood, they have backing of all their different allies, and then they learn to use this, and then flood the immigration system with BS claims and all that. So because Canada is a country that loves to help a victim out, they were really able to infiltrate at every level of society by the virtue of, for lack of a better term, woke nonsense.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'll touch a little bit more on the Khalistan issue, and I do want to
Rishi,
take some time.
I apologize. Just before you go into your segment, thank you so much. I'd like to open also it to the audience. Please do feel free to submit your questions in the discussion box, and we'll address them. Please, Rishi.
Yes, sorry, no worries. So I want to spend some time and talk a little bit about history because it's important for the audience to understand where this whole issue started from and how it has morphed into this victimhood now, and which has actually no real basis. So back in 1971, when Pakistan they lost the war to India, they and when the East Pakistan became Bangladesh, they knew that they will not be able to defeat India like in a combat war. So they started this ideological political movement in India. They call it Bleeding India by Thousand Cuts, and it's the 2K project, which is one is Kashmir and the other is Khalistan. Now, me being a Kashmiri Hindu, married in a Sikh family, I've seen both sides. Maybe we can talk about the Kashmiri Hindu genocide at another webinar, but today let's focus on Khalistan. So Khalistan is about balkanization of India, and they want, like, they claim that they want a separate land for themselves only in India, not in Pakistan, only in India. So this Khalistan insurgency, it peaked in India in the 80s, and it led to killing of thousands, maybe thousands of innocent Sikhs and Hindus in Punjab. It led to the Blue Star operation. It led to the assassination of the Indian Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and also the pogrom of Sikhs in Delhi. The Indian government, it dealt with that issue and killed the movement. However, some of these supporters of Khalistan, they found refuge in the West. Again, coming back to Daniel's point, the softer image that we have. So they found refuge in the West, not just in Canada but a couple of other countries. And West also allowed it as a stick to beat India with, to suit their needs, maybe provide like a strategic counterweight to India. So, and in Canada, the Canadian Khalistanis, they are responsible for the Kanishka bombings, which happened in the June of 1985. It was the biggest terrorist attack before 9/11, and in fact, I think it is still the biggest aviation attack. Where the airplane was bombed and it killed all the 329 people on board, including 268 Canadians. And this happened in spite of repeated warnings and multiple extradition requests from India, including for Talvinder Singh Parmar of Babbar Khalsa, which is a banned terrorist outfit, one of the main perpetrators of this bombing. And worse, it took 25 years for the Canadian government to acknowledge that this is a Canadian tragedy. It was the judicial inquiry that was conducted by Honorable John C. Major, with I think it started in 2006, probably ended in 2021. It was ordered by the conservative PM Stephen Harper, and that acknowledged the intelligence failure. It acknowledged the lack of coordination between CSIS and RCMP, security gaps, and most importantly, the neglect of the victim families. The Justice Major quoted, and I'm reading here. So the families of the victim deserves a complete factual account of what happened and why. The Canadian public deserves to know how their institutions failed and what was done to ensure it never happens again. So that was the history of the Khalistan movement in India and how it moved to Canada. So this is a critical history that I wanted to share, because what we need to understand, the problem is, it's a bigger problem, and the problem needs to understood holistically and historically, rather than just looking at a certain incident in isolation. So fast forward to today. So we have these diaspora networks and foreign entities, and that claim that their first claim is that all Sikhs want Khalistan. The second claim is that Sikhs are oppressed in India. So, so automatically they have to migrate in the West. Now, I am married in a Sikh family, and my experience could be anecdotal, but the Sikh community is one of the most prosperous minority community in India. The Pew Research Institute, they did a survey in India in 2021, like very recently, and it was called Religion in India, Tolerance and Segregation. And what they found out was 95% of Sikhs are proud of their Indian identity, and they can practice their religion freely in India. And in fact, they are one of the most prosperous minorities in India. So, these two things don't add up. You cannot be prosperous and persecuted at the same time. And this is all public information. Anybody can, go and Google it. And in fact, the Hudson Institute report that they published in 2023, they also found that Pakistan's ISI, they are fueling this diaspora-based Khalistan activism in North America. So to close it, so what they do is they frame this so-called human right campaigns and calling Sikhs are oppressed in India. They use these networks to radicalize sometimes regular and sometimes already vulnerable people, and exploit the pluralistic environment of democracy and our migration system. And let me tell you that the objective is not to create an actual state of Khalistan, but
Hmm.
to keep this issue simmering and create like a low level anti India sentiment to erode, bilateral trust and diplomacy between India and other Western democracies.
Thank you. Thank you for this. I just want to point out also that in July of this year, the FBI arrested 8 individuals across the US who are identified as being part of a gangster terror network with links to the banned group Baba Khalsa International, BKI, which you had mentioned it's a designated terrorist organization. And so definitely there's been a very big rise again, once again renewed in the media attention to this issue. That takes me to my next question, right? Look, the media plays a tremendously important role in all of this. And the framing of the media narrative often frames basically this issue, romanticizes migration, and it resists discussing the security implications. How this is a question for Utsav and for Daniel, and then I'm going to open it up to Mark and Rishi for another question. I want to know, how do you think that this distortion of the narrative by the media, mainstream especially, hinders policymakers and law enforcement from addressing real threats without being labeled xenophobic or intolerant or a Nazi? Because that's what they do.
See, one of the most important things that media needs to understand, and all media is not the same, but there's a trend that I am pointing towards, is that they need to start speaking the truth. So just like what Mark pointed out, just like what Ruchi pointed out and Daniel pointed out, these are data points that are available out there in the open. They can be researched very easily. And the media can do it very quickly. I mean, they are being caught using AI to write articles, so they might as well do it to do the right things if they want to. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the media doesn't want to do it in many cases, and that is one of the reasons why there is distortion and disinformation out there. And Ruchi mentioned the Hudson Institute report on Pakistan's intelligence efforts in regarding Khalistan and other Kashmiri Islamist issues. That is a telling report. I would encourage everybody to read that report, because it talks about how the media itself gets compromised by many of these efforts. In fact, I can tell you that there are Khalistani TV networks in America, online TV networks in America, that every day call for the destruction of India and participation in joint efforts with China, sitting from American soil. They're broadcasting it. And there is nobody to oversee it or counter it. So there is a level of media ignorance, willful ignorance, I must say. And I need to talk also about how there is foreign influence funding on the media. I brought up the issue of Qatar when I was making my opening remarks. Qatar plays a very important role. So in terms of manipulating media narratives, and they have their good guys and their bad guys. And it so happens that the groups we are discussing here are on their good guy list. So they will instruct media in many cases to just say what they want them to say. And that is how bad it is in many cases. You know, you will be seeing that recently the Khalistan issue came to the light because of the two horrible traffic accidents, one in Florida and one in California, in which so many people, innocent people, died. And that was the first time when the media was actually forced to address the issue of who these people are, who these illegal asylum seekers are. But you will notice that at no point, despite the Khalistani organizations openly lobbying and providing legal assistance to these criminals who were involved in these accidents, at no point mainstream media in America uttered the word Khalistan. They started calling them Indian Americans because that's the more. There is no conversation on the point that most of these people get asylum here by claiming that they are the biggest enemies of India. And the media never points it out. You don't see it in the Washington Post. You don't see it in the New York Times. And I'm going to name them because they are responsible for not talking the truth. And that is, I think, is a very important conversation to be had from our perspective. And I think going forward, what we need to do is to have honest conversations like the one we are having at GIIS, and have as many people as possible see these things and share these things, because that's the only way people will get to know the truth. And I'm hoping that, you guys know GIIS has access to important people in the administration. So hopefully they get to see what's going on. And what is encouraging is that, as you mentioned, Adele, that there have been arrests and extraditions of Khalistan terror cult activists in the last year. That's a very encouraging thing. In the past administration, we never saw that to that degree, even though I'm sure everybody was aware of it. So I'm hoping that going forward, things will be better and there will be more responsible response from the media.
Thank you for that. Daniel, yourself, I was a journalist for 15 years too. I guess it never leaves you. I'm still a journalist, a media personality. And Daniel, how do you really reconcile with the fact that so many of your colleagues and our colleagues in the mainstream media are not doing their duty to report the truth? They're being influenced by, maybe covert actors. And how do you maintain the journalistic integrity of delivering the reality to the public, the
Well, I
masses?
mean, it's a bit different in Canada. I mean, keep in mind, in Canada, almost all media is government funded. The CBC is explicitly government funded, but under the Trudeau administration, everything kind of got on government subsidies. And, my entrance into media, my choice to go into it was because I was watching enough CBC one day and my brain just went, F it, I can do better than this. And then, I picked up a camera and started going. So I'm someone who's actually been targeted by the CBC because of my coverage of Khalistan for a hit job. And I have a bit better intimate understanding of how these things go. Now, luckily, I kind of knew what they were doing, and you can kind of blow it up. Like I had my friend come with me who just recorded the thing. So I was releasing clips before they could release clips, and then I was messing with them. And one day I'll show you the email exchange between me and the journalist. It's some of my best work. But you have to understand there's a bunch of different factors here. Now, the two biggest ones is people, Mustafa hit on it. Foreign funding, okay? Qatar, Iran, Russia, China, Pakistan. Most of are funding sort of media hit jobs, anti-Western stuff in different ways, but there's sort of financial pressures from them. And this can kind of be combated. Now, the real big problem is not so much with the foreign funding, which is a huge problem. I actually think the bigger problem is the ideological capture within those newsrooms. And there's a very interesting equation that I don't have the numbers on because no one studied this and it's an impossible one to get. But I'll pose it to you in the audience is how many radicals per normal people does it take to radicalize an organization? So you have a newsroom, and is it one radical to 30 people can radicalize them? Two radicals to 40? Like, we know there's some ideological radicals in there, right? Some hardcore Palestinian activists. They're not being paid by Qatar or anything. They were just brought up in, Islamist theology, and they hate Jews, and they just hate Jews, and they hate Israel, and that's their driving thing. And when someone at the CBC says, you know what, suicide bombings on a bus is bad, they Zionists, and they're going to attack, and they're going to write letters, and they're going to go. And most people are cowards. So you have 30 normal people you have two lunatics in an organization. Those two lunatics can drive those 30 normal people into the abyss of radicalism because they just don't want to deal with it, right? Most people just don't want to deal with it. Most people are just complete cowards, and they don't know enough about these, especially Khalistan. No one knows anything about Khalistan outside of, most Indian Americans and Indian Canadians. So you have this confluence of people are cowardly and lazy, and they have to deal with these two lunatics. And, lunatic A and lunatic B are screaming about it. So the easy thing to do is just say, let them have it. Now, you're a human being. So no human being goes, I just let them have it because I'm a coward and a failure as a man or a woman, and I didn't uphold my journalistic standards. That's never what people think of it. I'm always a genius and a good person. So because I am a genius and a good person, I am actually listening to diverse points of view and enriching myself culturally. That's why I gave in. I didn't give in to them. I listened to vulnerable minorities to help forward social justice. That's my internal justification. So that's how I then get more radical, right? So every newsroom has at least one lunatic on each subject, probably more. Bigger newsrooms, 10, 15 lunatics among, I think 10 to 15 ideological radicals among a group of 200 journalists could probably take over the entire institution, right? Because maybe there's two or three. I mean, you saw what happened to Barry Weiss. Now, Barry Weiss had her, Phoenix moment, but very few people were willing to stand up to it. And the few people that were willing to stand up to it were attacked. And then Barry had to start her own thing before she comes back and takes over CBS News. But that's the extreme outlier there. So you have this system where these few radicals can take over a completely captured institution. And when an institution's captured by people, and again, people don't know this, highly educated, highly intelligent people are I'll use my psychology degree, are the easiest people to fool. The most gullible people on the planet are educated and intelligent people because they think, I have a degree from Queen's University. My IQ is 2 standard deviations above the mean. I know what these words mean. I can't be fooled. I'm too smart. So because you don't check yourself so much, someone with a 94 IQ who knows, I'm a bit ditzy, I don't know how to balance, but I could really drink damn well, they're more likely to self-moderate and think, I might be able to be fooled. Let me think about this twice because I don't really trust, I'm not a brilliant guy. But people who like, I'm a journalist, I'm at the New York Times, I was educated at Harvard. There's no way anyone could fool me. Easiest people to fool in the world. So you have this perfect storm of all these professionals who are being sort of captured by the radicals, and then they go into these media institutions. So when things come up and there's a story that has to do with Israel or India or America or anything, against the narrative, these few people are driving policy, and everyone is just going to get out of the way and let them drive the ship there. So that's kind of how you get to this point where you have, in Canada, the way it'll work is you literally have like the CBC launder a story, sometimes through like Khalistan, through this Khalistani organization called Boz News. Boz News will make something up. CBC will then cover it. Then the CBC is covering it. Then Boz News will cover it. And then the CBC says, oh, diaspora's talking about it. Then the RCMP will come and do an investigation into nothing. But then the CBC can cover it. The RCMP is doing an investigation, and you have the circular loop, and now you have a story, right? And this is all too common, and the media plays a very important role in this. And there you go.
Thank you for that. No, that's really, really insightful. It's huge. Thank you for everything you're doing. I recall I was covering the Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to San Jose in 2015, and I had been just, covering what some Khalistani activists and Sikh activists and everyone. I got quotes from everyone across the board, and I had mentioned that just literally just giving a feel for what was happening in the counter protests and going through, one activist had taken a picture of Modi and was like hitting the bottom of the shoe. I said, yeah, and seen as a sign of disrespect and all this stuff. And I got attacked. I got attacked for covering the news objectively because someone got triggered and they wrote about it, and it goes to territory. But yes, thank you for upholding what you're doing and pushing back against the pressures. So speaking of the media narrative, speaking of this, these networks of asylum seekers that are coming in under false premises and using illicit ways and getting involved in illicit activities, I want to ask this question to Mark and to it and then the full panel. First of all, Mark, given the intelligence cooperation between the U.S. and Canada, right? It's already in a certain place, but I want to back up first and ask you, there's an integration of fentanyl precursors from China and synthetic production of, different drugs that are highly addictive in Latin America, Colombia in particular. There's been talk of Venezuela being another avenue of that. Do you believe that the Western governments fully grasp the hybrid nature of this threat? Part narcotics, part warfare, or is it still treated as purely a law enforcement issue? And with that said, I'd love to also have you address how you believe intelligence cooperation between the US and Canada can be strengthened to address the convergence of, drug trafficking, illegal immigration, and ideological subversion, tying in what the panel has been discussing regarding these, for example, Khalistani terrorist networks that are coming in as well across the border and engaging in these illicit drug trade activities, narcotics distributions.
So let me start off by saying, do you remember the war on drugs statement in the United States?
Yeah,
Many decades ago. So
it was
nothing's
Reagan, right?
changed. It's the same thing. It's just being repackaged. What criminal elements are still doing the same thing that they did before? All right. Now, do we have these precursors coming into Mexico and then them being manufactured into the illicit drug trade and being shipped up to North America, or the reverse route, Canada back into the United States? Of course. Here's the real question that has to be asked from a federal level, drilling down all the way down to the local level, is what's the commitment to stop it? Point blank. No politics, just some streetwise common sense. How do you want to stop it? And how aggressive do you want to get in on it? So, if we really, really want to stop it and really, really want to, we really have to look down at the local levels of the policing, because everything starts locally and then will expand nationally across the United States. So yes, the first step was we looked at the borders under the new administration, under the Trump administration. We locked down the borders. Okay, got it. We've always had DEA and other law enforcement agencies, including the NYPD, people going all over the world to work with our partners internationally. That is done. So the communications are there. There are already established communications from a law enforcement perspective, from an intel perspective, drilling all the way down to local law enforcement. All right. So that's already established. The question is, how much labor, and that's what it is, do we need to add to the police force, and how much also into the intelligence community to make it more efficient and more effective, and by there adding into the technologies to make this go? That is a discussion that has to be done, particularly now when we see a lot of our local law enforcement getting decimated in large metropolitan areas, because this is very, very important. What do we have in large metropolitan areas like New York City? We have transportation hubs. We have logistic operations. So we have spoke entire type of operations. Anybody who's done supply chain management understands this. And the other thing that's not looked at is we see a lot of the illicit drugs coming into, let's say, the United States. What happens after it's sold? Where's all that cash? That cash now is hard currency that has to leave the United States. How's it leaving? Are we setting up storefronts to wash it and make it look legitimate? Is it physically being trucked back out? That has to be looked at, the reverse flow. Because the only thing that's going to stop these criminal organizations is really you have to go after the money at the end of the day. So no matter how we have all our banking systems set up to look at this and look at anomalies and everything like that, once the cash is on the street, is how is that getting back to the bad guys, the reverse flow? And we don't talk a lot about that we don't see a lot of that in the media being spoken about. It's probably being done very quietly with our intel organizations and with our partners. Is what are they doing? Where's this money going to? Physical. Think about how much physical cash there is. How do you wash that? Now, this is very, very interesting too, because this plays directly to what we've all been talking about, different ethnic groups. When you look at when different ethnic groups establish what? Different types of businesses, right? So when we look into, if we use at one point in time, the Jews were very big into the schmata industry, which meant the rag industry, which meant fashion, right? To now we see that really going into what? Into basically into people in the United States are coming from India and Pakistan, and they now are taking over that particular niche. We see certain people going into the hotel business or into the gasoline station business and mini mart business. When these start to pop up, as was mentioned here today, what are the illegal gangs doing? They're starting to set up these businesses for what? To help support their illicit activities to reverse the money flow. So it's spoke in wheel. It's spoke in wheel. There's a lot of moving dynamics here that law enforcement and intel has to look at. It's not, and the other thing is it's not sedentary. It's extremely, extremely fluid. What we need to see with local law enforcement is trying to cultivate people from that particular community, because as Daniel very well said, these people become victims in that community. There's nothing new. At the turn of the century, we saw the new Jewish immigrants coming in and they became victims from organized crime, just like the average Joe or Jane working on the Lower East Side. That's nothing new. But there are people in those communities who have assimilated in our societies, who are citizens, that we need them, because why? They know the culture, the ethnicity, the language. We need these people involved in our law enforcement intelligence communities so they can assimilate and do the work on the street, because you're not going to sit and write a paper. You're not going to do intel unless you have gumshoes, knocking down doors, doing the undercover work that needs to be doing, and cultivating the confidential informants. That can only be done there. And then you work from there, and then you work out, because that sets up the brick and mortar for your intelligence and for in your investigations and for your operations. So we really, really have to decide how aggressive, and also our partners on the other end, and I'm talking about our partners outside the United States, how aggressive do they want to combat this? This is very, very important, because if they're not, you might have, and this has happened to me many, many times, is I might have a counterpart from another law enforcement agency who's there, but my law enforcement agency sees this more as a priority, and they're going to be more active in going after an investigation. So we have to all be on the same page, and that's where diplomacy comes in. But also, it's building those trusted networks to really defeat these organized crime gangs. And these gangs are highly, highly sophisticated. Yeah. I mean, I don't know how much of our audience, but to talk on a terrorism here, where ISIS has a magazine called Dabiq. Yeah. And everyone's heard of Al-Qaeda's Inspire. This looks like they're coming out of Madison Avenue advertising agency. They're very slick, and that's how they recruit, and that's how they do their propaganda, and that's what's being done, which everyone on the panel here has already alluded to and pointed out, that they know our systems. And what are they doing? What is the criminal elements doing? They're assimilating into our government systems and into our law enforcement systems and starting to understand it very, very, very well. They're very astute. So this makes the job for law enforcement and our intelligence agencies even that much more challenging.
Yeah, that's a cultural war. Absolutely. Making terrorism chic.
Add something here, Adele, to what Mark has said. You know, it is also a matter of will will in terms of our governments at the local and the national level to deal with this situation. Because what we have observed, and this is something just that happened over the last 6 months, I'll give you two examples of cases. For the last 8 years, our government had known what was going on in this country and in Canada. And there was cooperation in intelligence gathering, I believe. But there was no action on the ground for many reasons that Mark pointed out, because there are not enough people who are connecting the dots. So two things happened. One in June this year, where the US DEA and the RCMP worked together. It was called the Pelican Project that happened in June. They arrested a Khalistan terror network from the Khalistan Tiger Force worth 479 kilograms of cocaine, worth $47 million. And it was connected directly to the Mexican cartel, to Hezbollah, as well as to the Khalistan. So it is a transnational, trans-ideological terror network here. Another example, Upinder Singh Sial, from July this year. He was arrested in Arizona. He's a Canadian national, a trucker, and this time he was held with a 1 ton shipment of fentanyl. And this guy used to go by the nickname Thanos, American popular comic book character. China connection, ISI connection, Hezbollah connection, and involved in sex trafficking. You name it, it's there. So this is just from the last 1 year. And I believe these things were known to our government for much longer. It's just that there has not been people connecting the dots and acting upon it. And I think Mark's point that there needs to be a vertical integration in terms of the will as well as the mechanism to deal with it is the most critical point.
Yeah, even the recent case where they arrested somebody in New Zealand, that was the biggest drug bust in New Zealand. They caught almost 713 kgs of high potency meth, and it all came from Canada. And not a single arrest has been made in Canada. So,
From
yeah.
the same networks, yes.
Yes.
So thank you for that. We're getting a few questions from the audience. I'd like to, before I get to my questions again, just address one question from the audience to the panel, okay? This was sort of addressed in the opening, but I think that for some people, this is more specific. Many reports and social media accounts suggest that between 2021 and 2024, some individuals may have entered the US and sought asylum through fraudulent claims, right? With some reportedly now holding green cards. Data shows a significant increase in irregular migration from regions such as Punjab, where individuals allegedly paid large sums. Daniel, you alluded to this, sometimes up to $25,000 to reach the US. Is the current administration aware of these cases, and what measures are being taken to investigate or prevent potential misuse of the asylum process? And these individuals have been successfully, in these networks, been able to draw a false equivalence between legal and illegal immigrants, hurting those living in the US legally. And the recent truck drivers, for example, is an example that is cited by this question asker. So I'd love to have whoever would like to take the first stab.
I'll say, maybe I'll open this. So are they aware? I think so. I've talked to some US officials. Are you aware of the Khalistan issue? And they say yes, yes, yes. Now, are they going to do anything about it? And this is like a matter of, where does policy come from? And this is like, I think my biggest criticism, I'll say, of the Indian government from a power ranking perspective of why India, in my view, will never be a superpower. Might be a regional power, but never a superpower. Because India has no soft power. None. There are no soft power elements in India. And India is a fundamental misunderstanding of how the West works. They think the West works like India, where they make the same mistakes of the West, where the West imposes Western cultural values on India. It gets confused. Indians do the same thing to the West, where they think that there's some bureaucrats in an office who make policy, and if we can convince these sort of the elites or whatever within bureaucracy, that's how it's done. And I would say, no, that's not how the West works. Policy is downstream of where the culture is. So the people need to embrace something. And because the American people don't understand what Khalistan is and don't care what Khalistan is, because they don't know what Khalistan is, nothing will be done about Khalistan. Even though some officials might know, there's no public will, there's no understanding, which is, again, why you're always going to see these people framed as Indian Americans, because you don't ever want to talk about things that people don't understand, because then they tune out. And if you're a media organization, people tune out or get confused and stop listening, well, then you're losing viewers, right? So the actual way to, if you're the Indian government and you're playing international politics against Pakistan. Now, we'd all love no foreign interference in our countries, but let's get real politique. The Khalistan issue is a quasi proxy war between India and Pakistan fought out in the diaspora, right? It's war by other means, right? Instead of shooting at each other on the border, which they do every couple decades or so, this is a war ideologically. And India is not playing the game. India is not playing, which is why they're losing. So because no one knows what Khalistan is, and because there's no cultural awareness of Khalistanis being connected to truckers and drugs, nothing will really be done about it, right? This is why Trump's buying Venezuelan boats, because people know, oh, narco trafficking comes from South America. Why? How many TV shows? How many versions of Narcos are there? Right? We all know Pablo Escobar, right? You have a Colombian drug dealer, right? You have Al Pacino snorting, cocaine. Say hello to my little friend. Culturally, we understand drugs come from South America. Culturally, we do not understand that drugs come from Canada through a Khalistani network, funded by the cartels and the CCP interlocked with Hezbollah and all this. It's not in the cultural understanding. And in my view, because it's not in the cultural understanding, there is then no political pressure on the US administration to do anything about it, which is why they will not do anything about it, even though they're making big, big strides, trying to, even though stopping drugs and narco trafficking is part of their identity, the reason why they're not cracking down on Khalistanis is because people don't understand that, and therefore they can't get public wins on that. So that's my 2 cents on.
Also, they want to use this, and I talked about it earlier. They want to use this Khalistan issue as a stick to beat India with, just to, have that counterbalance strategically, maybe geopolitically, that, to give them these so-called lessons of democracy and human rights and everything. So they want to use it to their own advantage when, like I said, there is no real basis of Khalistan in India. Nobody cares about it. Nobody wants it. So earlier, while it was a issue that started there, everything has migrated here. But unfortunately, people do not have enough understanding of the issue here in the West. So
I
it
would,
has become a Western problem as opposed to an Indian problem.
I would like to add that I think Justin Trudeau's government was a perfect example of what Ruchi was talking about. He really turned this issue into a geopolitical stick. And he did that with not just with India, but also with Israel, doing the same thing with the pro-Hamas elements in Canada. But and the problem is that once you set an example in one country through a political ideology, then you will see in America, I'm sure that there will be a big leader in the left who is going to follow and try to copy what Justin Trudeau did. And I'm afraid, just elections happened in New York City. So, I shudder to think what's going to end up happening there. But this is going to be the outcome of these ideologically driven geopolitical decisions. And as Ruchi pointed out, Justin Trudeau is a perfect example of what could go wrong when you use a global terrorist network and movement to support your ideological agenda globally.
Yeah, so essentially, thank you for that. Of course, what about in the US? It's a market, right? Do you believe that the current administration, the Trump administration, is aware of these cases in which these asylum seekers are coming in here? Supposedly, they're actually paying for green cards. Apologies, paying for green cards, paying for, some $25,000 to reach the US through illicit methods. Are they aware of this? Do you have any insight into it?
Yeah, I'm very confident. You hear Holman speaking all the time about topics like this, and our government officials and law enforcement, they're well aware of it. The other thing are the passports, getting these illegal passports too, and that's really where DSS comes in, diplomatic security services, as well. How are people getting these passports, not only the green cards, and basically how are they? If you're a bad guy, right? This is very basic. It's not rocket science. You want another identity. You want to come in here and do whatever you need to do to make yourself look legitimate. So the first thing I'm going to get is a social security number. I'm going to get a green card or some papers. I'm going to put myself on Medicaid or whatever to support myself here where I'm here. All the benefits, let's say. And then I'm going to go do my illicit work. You have to think about this. Bad guys go to work every day, just like you and I. It's that simple. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. We talk about getting green cards. We talk about possibly getting documents. Where are the very stringent checks and balances and vetting of getting these documents? Are our agencies that are responsible for giving these documents and giving these benefits, do they not have enough people to do the vetting? Why did it get to the point where in New York City we had illegal aliens and the drug gangs, we're talking about drug gangs, taking over the hotels? Okay. Is it that a truck driver who cannot even speak English and pass a test gets a CDL license? We spoke about already here. So where are the checks and balances? If you're telling me that because of policy of a state that has a different mantra than what a national administration is actually thwarting law enforcement efforts and compromising the safety, and that there's no recourse, then we have a big problem. What most people don't understand, when you get a driver's license, for instance, that opens up a whole world. If you're a person, you can do anything pretty much with that driver's license once you get it. Now, because of states like New York, that you don't have to be a US citizen and you can get a driver's license, some financial institutions now and other institutions won't accept that. So you might have to have a US passport, right? Something like that to prove that you're an American citizen. So if you can't even stop the permitting process or the compliance processes at a basic level, organized crime is going to definitely run wild. And all they need is one piece of documentation to open up any illicit activity, even a storefront. If you want to open up an LLC in your state, how difficult is it? What are they checking? What are the banks checking? All they care about is if money goes in below $10,000 that they don't have to report it, right? For the Patriot Act. So, and other banking laws. So they are well aware of it. I can't tell you how many people that I've arrested that they had one card had one name, another card had another name, another card had a male name, a female name. It's amazing. And here's the other thing. If you don't speak that language, and if I'm not versed in a particular language, you can have any name on there. For instance, we think the name in Russian, Sasha. Well, a typical American might think Sasha is a female name, but really it's a male name. So now you're checking all the boxes one way. And now for the future, as a bad guy, you're vetting yourself one way. So so the documentation process is extremely important.
It is. And I have to interject here for a second, Mark. When I was a reporter for Breitbart News in 2015, for many years I was there, for like 4 or 5 years. I had so many sources that will forever remain anonymous. That was part of the journalistic integrity that I feel needs to stay intact. But I broke so many exclusive stories. One of them happened to be about a policy memorandum that was issued by the DMV internally that said that directed the DMV investigators to overlook identity theft by applicants, quote, who may have attempted to obtain or been issued a license or ID card previously through submission of false information. Literally. So exactly what you're saying here, back 2015 was a formal policy implemented internally. Um, and I don't know, I don't think much has changed, to be honest with you, according to what you're saying. You can look up the article in Breitbart. It literally exclusive. California DMV order to overlook identity theft by illegals by Adel Nazarian. So it's the same story.
I mean, why wouldn't you want to come to the United States and do crime?
Why
I mean,
wouldn't
just think about it. If you put yourself in the mindset of the bad guy. If you have to look from the bad guy's perspective, not from the good guy's perspective. think like a bad guy, and you will find everything that's at your fingertips to do illicit activities.
So thank you for that. So this is another question that I want to ask, to Mark, to Utsav, and to the audience in general. But I want to ask you, Utsav, if I may, particularly with the work that you do at Hindu Action, right? If you were to advise the current or the next U.S. administration, you, Mark, and Utsav, what three legislative or policy measures would you prioritize to close the loopholes that allow for ideological exploitation of asylum and migration channels?
So I can start by saying that the first thing that our administration needs to do is to drop this differentiation based on their own internal. So this Democrat versus Republican back and forth. One of the reasons why we are seeing so many things coming out of California is this entire internal divide that we have, where we have to oppose anything that the other party is doing at a federal level, no matter who is in power. And that creates cracks in our system. And because of that crack, things are falling through. So there needs to be an integration of our national security setup. And we need to start treating international crime, asylum networks, drug running, and terrorism as an integrated national security threat rather than a local law enforcement issue. And to further add to that, once we start doing that, we will start designating many organizations that are currently operating in America as international terrorist organizations that will be facing all the sanctions that are required for international terrorists. So the framework itself needs to be upgraded to address these ideologically driven, terror-driven drug and crime networks. Number two, I would go on and add and say that these then need to fall under terror financing laws. There was a reason that after 9/11, we were able to crack down on many pan-Islamic terrorist groups, because we were actually applying these laws. And then somewhere 3 years, 4 years down the road, things started falling through the cracks again. And now we have a whole network of multinational, pan-Islamic groups who are operating on our soil in our campuses, laundering money. So we just need to apply the laws in this, and it applies to all setups. And then we need to start investigating US-based groups that are speaking on behalf of these global terror networks, and really look into what they stand for. If they stand for violence, if they have committed violence, then there needs to be a ban on these organizations and their network. I'll give you an example. Every year, there are 4 rallies in front of the White House and in all over America by the Khalistani extremist groups. The rallies are organized by a person named Ghulam Nabi Fai, who spent 2 years in American prison for being a Pakistani ISI spy. He still organizes these rallies. And there is nobody out there even questioning.
Operating freely on US soil. If he was in Germany, if he was in the UK, if he was in an Arab nation, if he was in any other Western nation, European nation, he would be apprehended.
No. Don't slander the West, especially Canada. Like every parade, everything, all the Versace parades are organized by people on the no-fly list. You can still get. We designated an offshoot of the PFLP, Simadiyun, a terrorist organization in Canada. They still have tax-free status. You can be a terrorist organization in Canada and still get tax exempt status. Okay, so you can join a terrorist group and use it as a tax write-off in this country. Don't pretend that America is the only country that has these type of problems.
Yeah.
In Europe, like I'm sure it's more similar to Canada than it is in the United States. So
It
let's
depends
not
on where
pretend
in
we have
Europe you
the
are, though.
Just last year, there was a Hindu mandir, that was Hindu temple, that was attacked in the GTA. We had the anniversary of it yesterday, I believe. And Khalistani people, they entered the mandir premises and they beat the devotees, and they even beat some women out there, and not a single arrest has been made. It's been 1 year. People have been shouting at the top of their voices, trying to engage with all levels of government. Not a single arrest has been made. So
there were
that's
arrests, but no
Fine.
convictions and no prosecution. Right?
yeah.
Canada is it's like we're ethical fishers. Think of it's a very catch and release. So it's like an annoying guy's Tinder profile. You catch a Khalistani, this would interesting Gosol, You show him,
Yes,
you
he
take
was
a
also
picture,
caught. Yeah,
you
he
put it on
released
your Tinder
again.
profile, and then you throw the terrorist back into the ocean to commit more terrorism. Where he
Yeah.
then made a video on the internet threatening to kill me
Yeah,
and Logan.
one measure I think that the West should take is, especially when it comes to the Khalistan extremism, they should declare India as a safe state. They should not be accepting any asylum claims from India. Like there could be some exceptions, but not on the basis of like Sikhs are prosecuted there, or their political ideology or their religious ideology is at harm, so that's why they need to migrate to the West. UK did that a couple of years ago. There was a big bust that happened in UK, and after that the UK government declared India as a safe state. I think Canada, US should also do that. I mean, if you go to social media, there are so many videos you'll find circulating where people are saying on record, advocates, like these asylum seekers, oh, we have conned the system, and they're boasting their credentials to get, more cases. Like
No, I
people.
absolutely, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I have to say something. This is addresses ties into a question from the audience as well. Basically, in 2015, the San Bernardino terrorist attack shooting, carried out by Rizwan Farouk and his wife. Forgot her name at the moment, but basically, I broke quite a few exclusive stories. I even had interviewed his professor, Danny Dueri, wonderful man, wonderful, intelligent man. um, One of the things that I uncovered in my reporting back then when I was at Breitbart as well, is that the neighbors of these terrorists, they had seen the weird activity, they had seen the suspicious activity and been very wary of them, but they did not report it to authorities for fear of being called Islamophobic or seeming xenophobic. And that's where we're at today. And so the question I have from the audience now to Rushi specifically, and with the rest of the audience, is the amount of file threats. This is verbatim from a question from the audience. The Khalistanis issue to Indians, even diplomats. Do you not think that if they were Muslims, the West would have by now designated them as a terrorist group and sent them to Guantanamo Bay? I mean, Gitmo has 15 detainees right now, so it's been dwindled down, not shut down yet, as was promised. But basically, do you think that what is the difference between having the Khalistani groups designated as terrorist organizations versus other Muslim groups like the Islamic State and Hezbollah and whatnot? Why do they get designated, but do you think the Khalistani groups do not, that have carried out terrorist acts?
I think I talked about it a little bit. The Khalistani people, they come under the guise of that they are prosecuted religiously or politically. So they use that human angle basically to they use this humane angle to get into our system. That could be one of the reasons that they are not prosecuted. And we know for a fact that Khalistanis have infiltrated Canadian Canadian politics, Canadian systems, whether it's our forces or parties. They have infiltrated across party lines, and they have cover. I mean, we have a lot of politicians in the Canadian Parliament who have affiliation to this ideology, and couple of organizations that are calling out for, let's say, Hindus go back to India. Or even if you speak against Khalistan, they are wild people. There is a cost attached to it. They have beaten so many people to death, literally, like Ujjal Dosanjh, Balraj Deol, and recently there was a guy, I think his name is Ravi. And even I, as a normal human being, I'm like a nobody. I do get threats, so there is a cost attached to it. And because they have infiltrated our systems so deeply, they get maybe internal protection. So
Thank you
that
for that.
is.
Here's what I'd like to do. We are literally having to close this out. I would love to give everyone about a minute or two just to give closing remarks. Please keep them brief if you can. I know this is a very long discussion that we've only scratched the tip of the iceberg here, so we'll have more talks on this hopefully in the future. But please, I'd like to start out with Mark, if you'd like to give some closing thoughts.
Sure. I think if we look to policing policy going forward, and we're talking about transnational organized crime groups and terrorist groups and who's going to be on the FTO and everything, we're going to have to look back at the structures of our local police departments to see if they're very well equipped to handle this now, particularly as what we're talking about now are groups coming into major metropolitan areas first, because that's where they can assimilate very, very quickly and go incognito. And that's the starting points. If we don't have that support, in cities such as in New York, in Boston, Chicago, San Francisco, because that's where all these groups are going to first migrate before they spread out into mid-America and into rural America, which, 10 years from now might be a metropolitan area of a big city. We're going to find ourselves completely behind the 8 ball. And these crime gangs and organized crime and terrorist groups, we have to keep in mind that they are extremely sophisticated. They have the same technologies as law enforcement, the same contact networks that we have, that we understand, same organizational structures. So the policy really now has to be is how are we going to get those retention levels and recruitment levels up across the United States in local law enforcement. That way, because that is a national security issue, if we don't have that, then these bad guys will then exploit those local municipalities, which then means what? We just saw a takedown of an ISIS terrorist group, right? In the Midwest, and we just saw how that what sort of chaos that could have caused, and they were going to base it off a 2015 Paris attack. If we don't stop it at the local level, we're not going to be able to stop it at all. And that means looking at everything that we can do and start these strong partnerships. We're starting to go back into silos with our federal friends. We're starting to silo everything. We need greater cooperation.
Amazing. Thank you. Wonderful. I'd like now to go to Rushi.
So I think we touched upon the Khalistan issue a lot. So I just want to say that by and large, Hindus and Sikhs, not Khalistanis, Hindus and Sikhs in Canada, they are peaceful and contributing members of the Canadian society. But we face tremendous hate and violence because of these people very active on the ground here in Canada. And these extremists, these separatist movement, they use our own systems against us. They use our own values, our own democratic principles, our freedom of speech, pluralism, and they use these ideologies to draw a wedge between a contributing community of, like, say, Hindus and Sikhs. And because of that, sometimes an average Canadian also views immigrants through a lens of suspicion. So I would like to use this platform to urge to our authorities and our governments to take this issue like really seriously, and act on it. Like, words are not enough. It's about time that we act on it and we do not face another, I don't know, like another Kanishka bombing or an issue of that scale or a devastation of that scale. That would be my. I am hoping for some positive action from our government, our RCMP, CSIS, and all the other bodies who can help here.
Great. Thank you so much. Daniel?
Yeah, I'd like to do the Canadian thing and shout out some diversity, equity, inclusion, and highlight some minority terrorist groups that didn't get enough attention in Canada. So we have Khalistan, we have Islamists, we talk about communists. But let's not forget that our public safety minister is literally caught funding the terrorist organization, the Tamil Tigers. So we have many different types of terrorist organizations. They're all throughout Canada. So kids, if you want a good, high-paying job and you realize that education is getting overcrowded, start a narco-terrorism ring. Right, start trafficking drugs, use that money to fund your friend to blow up an airplane or something, and then you too can become a minister in the Canadian government, maybe even prime minister. So kids, it doesn't matter what terrorist organization you join, just make sure if you want to be prime minister of Canada, you join some sort of narco-terror outfit, and you too can become the prime minister of Canada one day.
Is that why my nomination was cancelled, Daniel?
Oh, well, it was. Oh, that's funny. Thank you so much, Daniel. And Utsav, you could please also give your closing remarks.
I just want our audience and anybody else who is hearing in positions of power in America to understand that we have to learn from history, and we have to learn that there is a reason why we could not prevent 9/11. The warnings were coming from the late 80s. It happened once in 1993. It happened eventually in 9/11. And 25 years down the road, on a day when we just had the results of an election in New York, if we do not learn from our past mistakes, we will be condemned to repeat it. And the more important point that we need to understand is that if you, and this is to our people in power and thought leaders, if you do not understand an issue, then approach people and try to get help from people who understand it. People like me who are part of organizations that are doing advocacy, we can provide the knowledge and the background that is needed. And I'm not saying that there is only one way to know it from multiple ways. But please understand that if we do not address this issue in a more specific and directed manner, we are going to create more problems. So if you hate all Indians because of two Khalistani sympathizers killing coming here illegally and killing people in two tragic traffic accidents, you're not going to solve the problem. But if you address the problem where it needs to be addressed, if you address narco-terrorism, if you address terrorism, ideologically driven, transnational, foreign funded, we will be able to make America a better place. And since we have two Canadians here speaking about Canada, I'm going to speak about America and how we can make it a better place. Thank you.
Amazing, amazing. I just want to thank everyone here for this really insightful, amazing, and vital conversation. Thank you to everyone who participated in being part of this conversation. The insights that were shared today are obviously reminding us that truth, courage, and clarity are our greatest defenses against chaos, especially as we continue to fight against the threats we face not only abroad, but here within. Let's stay vigilant, principled, and united, and the truth will always be the best antidote to everything that we're facing. So thank you for upholding the truth, everyone here, and thank you for everything you're doing. And we look forward to having you in future conversations. And a recording of this discussion will be presented, available online on the Gold Institute website and also our YouTube channel in the coming days. Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of
Thank
your
you,
day.
Adele. Thank you. What a great session. Thank you to all the panelists.
Thank you very much. Have a
Thank
great
you.
day.